Good evening, everyone. As I mentioned previously, this video will be on nihilism and the Joker. And as you can tell, I dolled myself up a little more for this one to make it a little more interesting than some of my other videos. I went with Heath Ledger's Joker for two reasons. One, Heath Ledger's Joker focuses much more on nihilism, which is the theme, of course, I'll be talking about in this. And the other reason for that is that Heath Ledger's Joker's makeup is just a lot easier to do than Joaquin Phoenix's, even though Joaquin's is much more recent. And also, I have a face that's a little more rounded like Heath Ledger's and probably better fits this makeup, so that's what I'm going with. So, to kind of get into it, why I have always had an interest in the Joker and why that interest has kind of grown with me as I've gotten older rather than growing out of it is that the Joker was like the Sith Code in Star Wars, one of the first things I was ever exposed to as a kid that ran contrary to a lot of the ideas that I was being taught growing up. The Joker believed in no rules, he believed in chaos, and he believed in nihilism, even though at that age I didn't know what nihilism was. And that really reached a kind of a high water point when I saw Heath Ledger's Joker in 2008. I was a senior in high school and just beginning to kind of move away from a lot of those ideas that I had been taught growing up. And I remember when he was questioning Batman in the holding room, or Batman was questioning him, they were both kind of questioning each other. Some of the ideas that he was saying about how society is just one bad event away from collapsing, how codes and morals can all be broken, how everything is really just relative, being both morally relative, and how societal rules are really all written in pencil. That's something that I kind of had to learn at a very early age. Coming from a religious school where there were absolute ideas, absolute moral ideas, absolute religious ideas taught to us on what the Bible taught, on what the church taught, on what everything we'd been taught was holy. We had been taught that it was incorruptible and infallible. But I had begun to learn that really wasn't the case as I tried to make sense of it as I got older, and I tried very hard to make sense of it. I believed more resolutely than most other students that there was a heaven and hell, that the Bible was something you could interpret literally. And the harder I tried to do that, the more I came to more of a nihilistic conclusion as I was even just in my teen years, and I didn't even know what nihilism was, because I began to realize that the different definitions of the Bible open it up to many, many, many different interpretations, even if you do believe it's the absolute Word of God. And the same is true for many of the Catholic Church's teachings and many other organized religious bodies that claim their teachings are infallible or divine. And so that's why some things of the Joker kind of resonated with me when I saw Heath Ledger's version of it. Additionally, one reason I've always empathized with the Joker is, to be honest with you, I've always had a somewhat of an antisocial personality problem throughout my life. To be honest, and I really probably have, I've occasionally seen a therapist about it, but there's probably a need to see one even more so as I get older because some of my issues with it aren't going away. I've always been an incredibly quiet, somewhat antisocial and withdrawn person. I never have been particularly good at fitting in and never been particularly good at picking up on the things that other people around me are saying. And as I get older, I'm beginning to realize too that I do have that in common with the Joker as well, because anyone who knows the Joker's psychology will tell you he isn't necessarily a psychopath and he isn't necessarily a pure maniac. He just suffers from a severe case of antisocial personality disorder as well as schizophrenic psychosis, the latter of which I do not have, thankfully. But I do have a little bit of the former. And I can assure you that does, in some ways, it's an advantage in society because you can more clearly see hypocrisy. You can more clearly see some of society's inconsistencies, and maybe you can be better at avoiding falling into some of the traps of them. But at the same time, you usually find yourself unable to catch on and unable to fit in within others. And very oftentimes you find yourself a loner who's somewhat ostracized and kind of rejected by your peers growing up. And that's one reason I've also identified with the Joker for a lot of my life is some of his disorders along those lines. But now that I'm an adult and I understand nihilism, and absurdism as well, which for those of you that don't know, nihilism by definition is the belief that there is no absolute meaning or absolute values in this world. And absurdism is the by definition, the belief that the universe is chaotic and any attempt to make sense of it is errant and that inherently a person's life cannot have meaning or cannot have order, and to do so would run contrary to the universe. And of course, between those two, the Joker probably does fit more the definition of absurdism than nihilism. But I think there's a case to make that the Joker very much represents a lot of the fears of nihilism as well. Because one thing the Joker represents, being the main villain of the Batman series, is the fear of American society at whatever time that particular version of the Joker was crafted. For example, Jack Nicholson's Joker in the 1980s is the fear of organized crime, the fear of mob bosses, the fear of corruption within politics. Heath Ledger's Joker is the fear of nihilism, liberalism, and of terrorism, since he essentially is just a terrorist trying to control Gotham with acts of random violence. And the final most recent interpretation, Joaquin Phoenix's, represents the enemy within, represents every individual's battle with mental disorders, every individual's battle with socioeconomic problems, and the fear that we could all, as the Joker puts it in The Killing Joke, just be one bad day away from turning into a complete maniac or a complete psychopath. And it's a shockingly and frighteningly relatable endeavor that all of us probably have thought about from time to time. So that's one reason why I've also found the Joker of interest as I've gotten older, is that I know a lot of people have a lot of fears of nihilism and a lot of fears of change, as well as change in society, change in themselves. And these are fears, though, that I can't really relate to in the same way that the Joker doesn't relate to people's fears of nihilism or of chaos. Because, to be honest, I have never been able to find solace in the same rules of society or the moral values that other people have by trying to interpret and make sense of extremely conservative, extremely righteous moral values my whole life. All I've ever found is pain and confusion. And as I've gotten older, the only thing that's ever given me solace is being able to repeal a lot of those ideas and values, and being able to realize also as well that even though liberal values may have a lot of points and may be superior to the ones that I was brought up with, they also don't represent pure moral. Well, let me put it this way, they're fallible as well. The politically correct, superficial, and oftentimes very fake, politically correct values that liberals put forward, they have their flaws as well. And I think one of the best demonstrations of that was the 2016 Republican primary here in the US, where we saw Donald Trump's rise against political correctness. We saw the media, every time Trump would say some stupid politically incorrect statement about Mexicans, about women, about blah, 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 they would say he has to drop out. He's the worst person ever. He's a Nazi. He's a racist, yada, yada, yada. And what would happen? His followers would harden their support around him, and we'd see him rise in popularity. And eventually it led him to being the president. And this is why I think it shows that the political correctness of the left that Nietzsche warned about when he wrote about nihilism's overtake of the world has its flaws as well. But I don't find, and I think it's also a problem that a lot of liberals and maybe even some atheists and nihilists encounter, is that they find it to be just very scary to try to operate without rules and to operate without absolute laws. But that's one thing I've always had in common with the Joker, is I find it much more scary to be on the opposite end of that. Trying to imprison yourself with ideas and rules usually just leads you to greater confusion and greater pain than if you just try to accept chaos and try to accept that there is no inherent meaning or inherent laws or inherent ideas that are infallible in life. Now, that doesn't mean some ideas aren't better than others. That doesn't mean that Nazism is automatically a good idea. That doesn't mean that automatically we all need to go back to some extreme conservative viewpoint, because then that means that that viewpoint is automatically superior to others, or that any liberal idea that's not put forward couldn't have the potential to be right or wrong. But it does mean that you can't necessarily just rest on those ideas, and you can't necessarily just expect joining some political party or joining a mass movement to solve all your problems in life and to automatically give you meaning and to automatically give the world meaning and order. Because at the end of the day, it won't. That's something I found to be true on either side of the spectrum, on the political side of the spectrum, on either side of the spectrum when it comes to religion, or on either side of the spectrum when it comes to nihilism. Because as the Joker puts it, and as Friedrich Nietzsche puts it, at the end of the day, it's all just a futile attempt to control the world. As the Joker puts it, there's just different schemers that are trying to control the chaos, that are trying to control the world, that are trying to make deviations that they think make sense, but it is really futile. Because if you can't find some pleasure and can't just embrace the chaos and can't just embrace the fact that there is no inherent laws, you're going to find yourself a casualty of chaos and going to find yourself a casualty of nihilism, rather than benefiting from the differing competing ideas and benefiting from the freedom and the ability to make your own ideas in life, which for me is far greater than anything that any religion or any teacher or any political figurehead could ever give life, or any meaning they could ever hope to give to any individual's life. So I know that was kind of a awkward rant, and it was a little bit more on nihilism, I think, than the Joker, but I think it covered both in some form. So just to end this, just to show that I am still trying to relate both this to Nietzsche and to the Joker, I'm going to end it with one of Nietzsche's quotes and one of the Joker's quotes. As Friedrich Nietzsche would say, the ultimate end goal for all of us in life is ultimately death. And as the Joker would say, death is the ultimate punchline of this life. So with that, thank you, and see you next time.